In this series, we're going to dig into what it means to make a more customer-centric culture within your brand. So one of the easiest things you can do to make your brand more customer-centric is to start measuring customer satisfaction, or CSAT. The best way to measure customer satisfaction is after a valuable interaction or transaction. So if a customer buys from a website or buys from your store, follow up with a question to ask how satisfied were you with that experience. Now this rating can be quantitative, so it can be pretty much just a rating out of 5 stars or a thumbs up or thumbs down. And then you can follow on with some more qualitative questions after that. But it's most important that you just capture whether it was good, whether it was bad, and then store that against the customer's profile, but also against the store record as well, so that you can then roll that up and aggregate that data later. It's a really good way just to get a litmus on what stores and staff and experiences are gaining the most satisfaction on average and which ones could do better. What you can do with this information is then start pairing up stores that have consistently medium to low CSAT scores with stores that are doing a really good job, and they can coach each other on how they could do a better job of getting those scores up. The reason why you ask CSAT as soon as a transaction takes place is the experience is fresh in their mind. The best place to ask for this piece of feedback is generally in the e-receipt itself, or the receipt that you give the customer. You can't go far talking about customer centricity without coming across the dreaded NPS or NPS survey, or Net Promoter Score survey. Now, a lot of people out there think that NPS is really just asking feedback from customers, when really the NPS score is a very, very specific benchmark. It is an answer to the question of how likely you are to recommend this brand to someone you influence, a friend or family member. It's that simple, and a score between 0 and 10. Now, based on some complicated maths that you can Google and find out, you can get a score between -100 and +100 for your brand. And then that benchmark can be tracked over time. It's really important when you ask this question that you do it at a safe distance from a recent transaction or interaction. So you want to ask your customers this NPS question not just straight after they've done a purchase, because that can start colouring the results. You need to do it in open space. Asking this question regularly of your customers, maybe once every 1 or 2 years, and tracking that benchmark over time, and make sure you're asking this question on a rolling basis, not once a year on your timeline, but more on a rolling basis with all customers. Track your NPS, and it should give you a fairly good indication if all of your other customer experience initiatives shifting the tide towards a higher NPS score or a lower NPS score. You can also check your NPS score against other people in your industry, in your category, or your competitors, as a lot of this information is available out there. In order to focus on your customers and the results the customers are giving to your brand and the people that work within your brand, there's 2 really important measures that I really like to focus on. One of them is customer lifetime value and annual average value. So annual average value is the average of value generated by one known customer in a full year. So we need to make sure we're only calculating the transactions or net spend of a customer over a full year that they're with you. So you can't be including customers that have only started shopping with you within the last year. Now, the customer lifetime value is really just that annual average value multiplied by the number of years on average you expect the customer to stay with the brand, which might be hard to come up with, so you can just use a generic number there if you like, but make sure it's consistent over time. Now, these numbers can be great, and you can track them over time from an aggregate from your brand, but what's really interesting is if you start grouping your customers together into cohorts that are linked to certain channels or experiences. That way, the annual average value that's being generated by your customers can be grouped by the stores that own them. So you need to think of ways of how can I make it so that my customers, whether they shop online or in store, ultimately belong to a location or a store or a group of staff that are in charge of making sure that that customer is successful. Then you can start seeing you can start attributing those annual average value scores, the ones that are higher versus lower, to the particular stores or catchments that are generating those customer interactions and transactions. From there, you can actually start seeing the ones that are high performing and low performing, and start analysing why that might be. Start correlating this against some of your CSAT or NPS scores for similar locations, and see whether or not one leads to another. In retail, really the most important thing that we're all focusing on is a transaction, and a customer is generally seen as a byproduct of that transaction. To be customer-centric though, we need to start looking at customers first, and then seeing that transactions are a byproduct of known customers. In order to do that, we need to start tracking or caring about more than just the transaction. So what we mean here is start focusing on interactions. So making sure that customers can be tracked and we can capture data about what they're doing when they're interacting with the brand. So when they visit a store, when they're browsing around, when they're trying things on, when they're asking questions of staff, or when they're visiting the website and adding things to a cart or a wish list. Often this information is anonymous at best, so you need to think of ways that you can make it in the customer's interest to identify themselves at the start of one of these interactions. An interaction receipt, which we've spoken about before, is a great way to encourage this behaviour because the customer will get some value out of that interaction. Now, if the customer gets value out of that interaction individually, then you as a brand can get value out of those interactions and the data that's being generated within them on aggregate. And once you start combining that into cohorts that belong to stores or locations or regions, you can really start understanding what's likely to happen with respect to a customer's future purchasing decisions. You can also start linking interaction behavior to transaction behavior and start creating forward-looking models that interactions that happen like this and interactions that are trending in an upward direction equal future transactions that also link up in a forward direction as well. So this can actually really help you invest in the experiences that are generating more transactions. So in summary, make sure that you're focusing on interactions almost as much as you're focusing on transactions, and where possible, recording the information about those interactions against your customer profiles. Voice of customer, or VOC, is a really important strategy to implement within your brand. It allows you to always be listening to what customers are saying about the experiences that they're having. Whether this is something as simple as putting some hotjar tracking on your website so that customers that are having a bad experience or rage clicking when they're trying to add things to a cart or go to a store finder, you can quickly see where it is that they're getting stuck and having issues with your experiences. Once you've identified those things, these platforms often allow customers to type in what they're feeling, and you'll be surprised at how many customers are willing to provide written feedback as to why they're having issues or why they're enjoying an experience you provided for them. When it comes to making decisions, it's one thing to look at data, but it's another thing to look at someone's words. And when you hear that voice of the customer, it becomes a lot easier to convince internal stakeholders and upper management to invest in what their customers are asking for explicitly. One thing that a voice of customer program should always be doing is looking for the top 3 pain points in any particular experience, whether that be buying in store, buying online, with respect to getting deliveries or returns. Look at what the top 3 pain points that just keep rolling up to the very top of the list. Then create a customer experience initiative to address those 3 pain points. Make them go away. Implement tools, technology, processes, or culture changes that make those pain points no longer an issue for your customers. Then you'll discover there's another 3 pain points that are at the top of the list, and just keep working your way down that list. If you consistently focus on removing these customer pain points by listening to the voice of the customer, you will find that your customer experience more broadly will grow. Things like CSAT and NPS scores will lift over time. It's just a really practical way to make a big difference in your brand every day. Along with voice of customer, the customer service channel that you've got, your customer help desk, is one of the best sources for information and insights about what customers are wanting from you, or where your processes or culture is going off the rails and providing a bad experience to customers. Often the information and the feedback that you get from this channel is swept under the carpet. The customer service team do a great job of addressing all these customers' problems and needs, but in aggregate, the roll-up of all this information isn't being summarized and turned into insights that the brand can act on. So make sure that someone within your customer service team has the responsibility to roll up and summarize and aggregate the feedback that's coming back from your customers through the customer service channel. Make sure that every phone call, every live chat, every email, or every social media comment that comes through is adequately categorized and grouped together so that you can see what are the big issues that are coming back over and over and over again. Treat them like part of your voice of customer program that we talked about in the other video, and address them. Address the top 3, make those problems go away. Even get back in touch with the customers that experience one of your top 3 problems and tell them that you've fixed it, so that they are more likely to come back and recommend you to their friends and family. I hope you're enjoying this series on building a customer-centric culture within your brand.